must give respect to these great people that we have. They're not going to be with us forever. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Ivan Van Sertima.
This is the second in a series of 3 lectures on science of Africans and African Americans. Today, we're dealing with the science of the Moors. Who are the Moors? This is one of the most difficult of historical questions, and in fact, this is the most neglected chapter in black history. When the generals were surrendering, the Moorish generals were surrendering in 1492, the very year Columbus sailed to the Caribbean, a painting was drawn of these generals. These were the Almohade generals. The Almohade, the fourth of the last of 4 dynasties in Spain, had come to an end, had come to grief, in fact, in their last stronghold, Granada. And when the Castilian Spanish were defeating the Moors, a painting was done of the defeat, and there were black generals surrendering. What were they surrendering if they were not in charge? The story of the Moors, however, is extremely complex. But before I begin to talk about it, I just want to say something that fills me at the moment. Because one of the things that I remember is the way I felt after I'd finished writing They Came Before Columbus. I had spent 7 years, and even though I was teaching, moving about, etc., I literally lived in that book. I lived in my head for 7 years. And coming out of it was very strange to me because I was looking at people differently, I was looking at a great lot of things differently, and I was not surprised that I was attacked. And I responded with great force. I don't know where my attackers are now. But one thing that struck me with tremendous force was the feeling of absolute loneliness. I knew very few of the people here. I did not know much about, I never met Ben Yochanan. I had met, I think, John Clark. I never met Chancellor Williams. I had read his work, etc. But I had lived in isolation. In order to do my work, I lived in total isolation. I had a habit from early of cutting myself off for years without seeing anyone. And that is what I did. After these years, these 12 years since They Came Before Columbus, one of the things I can say is that we are not alone anymore. What we have now is a crusade. This is not the lonely struggle it was. We have a crusade. We have a tremendous body of people all over the country who are moving in a certain direction. I traveled quite a lot. In February alone, I was in 18 states. And one goes before many audiences, all types of audiences. I was a keynote speaker, for example, at NASA a few weeks ago, where I had to speak before the space scientists, both white and black space scientists. And they were very worried about the question of the survival of the space program and the survival of sophisticated science in this country, because we are in a very desperate state where we are not producing enough scientists. And the head of the space program was pointing out that in the 21st century, we have to make a tremendous appeal to blacks and Hispanics, because if we cannot recruit them into the field of science, we will not be able to maintain the level we have maintained before. And in fact, so serious is this problem that we're trying to build smart computers that would crystallize the genius of those great scientists that are likely to die and retire within the next few years. And we hope that the computers will be smart enough to have the insights of these great scientists. I don't think that will happen. So that we have got to realize that we have got to become aware of how important it is. We are living in a very different world. We are living in a world where there are more computers than people. That point was reached in 1982 when Bell Labs reported there were more than 4 billion computers on Earth, and there are not yet 4 billion people. So we are living in a world that is going to change dramatically, and a world in which we have to become very much aware of the power and capacity we have both for improving life and destroying it. And at the moment, many people who are in charge of science, in spite of the fact that it advances the world, or really the great majority of the world, still becomes poorer and poorer. So it really depends on a different kind of consciousness. We're not just intent on improving our technology, but improving the kind of human being that controls that technology. Because in the final analysis, civilization is not technology. Civilization is the humanization of the human. And if therefore, as that technology advances, the human shrinks, then that technology will destroy the human. This, in fact, we saw very clearly in the war where the Germans were tops. They were the marvelous great scientists. When I was being driven to speak at NASA, one of the NASA scientists was explaining to me that if they had not seized half of the German scientists, they would have no space program. The Russians seized half and the Americans seized half. So it was Hitler's scientists that made it possible for us to get into space so quickly. But what happened to the Germans? They were these marvelous people, advanced technologically, but they have become brutes, barbarians. So that we have to become aware of the fact that civilization has advanced and become more sophisticated with that technology. This is our chance. And we have got to look very seriously at our history, because it is only through history that we can become aware of our enormous contribution and become confident of what we can do and what we cannot do. That is the most important thing. Our young people, and when I say young, I mean people up to 50. That is very young in the modern world. Gorbachev, for example, who is now in charge of Russia, is considered to be one of the most extraordinarily young men of the world. Leaders are usually in their 70s and 80s. It is very unusual to find a man close on 60 who's a leader, a major leader. That is a very young man. And that is something that I have to stress, because I am very startled by people who by the time they're in their mid-20s, because they didn't get a break, they say, well, I've had it. I lost my chance. When I was 28, I entered university. I got my BA at 32. And I was no special student. When I was 9, I was struck by a terrible disease which killed half of my country. I lost all my friends. Part of my brain was damaged. It didn't stop me, and it didn't make me think that, oh, I am lost, it's all over. I hear this over and over again. I even hear people going about talking about, hey, AIDS will kill all of us. That is pure nonsense, defeatist thinking, because Europe was struck by a disease worse than AIDS. It killed half the European population. And it was not like AIDS where it was restricted for a long time to a few people. Every morning when the Europeans woke up in certain parts of Europe, the way we collect garbage, they collected bodies. Everybody, every household was struck by that disease. So you have to understand that, and they did not have the science we have today where we could say, well, in 5 or 10 years we will find a cure. There was no cure. It had to live itself out. It had to destroy, practically wiped out the population of Europe. So we have got to realize that if we are going to go back into history, we have got to use it as a force, as a positive force. History is such a force. It is like a religious thing. You become aware of these shattered fragments and parts of ourselves so that you could make yourself whole again.